Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest event in the Comment Visions series. Comment Visions, a partnership between European Voice and Euronews in association with Shell. It's not long since our last event. We normally try and leave it a little bit longer, but we were so excited about this one, we thought we'd squeeze another one in before the summer break. Chris Davis was telling me he did 4 CCS events this last week, and this is only the first this week. So, this event is taking place sort of linked to Sustainable Energy Week, which I'm sure you're all involved in or aware of. I'd like to point a couple of things out. One, that there's a video showing on a screen outside, which is a sort of basic introduction to the principle of CCS and how it works. So if you've got time afterwards, it's worth watching that video. We're holding this event to look at the subject of carbon capture and storage under the headline Progress and Prospects. We chose that title for an obvious reason. We know that fossil fuels are set to account for a significant proportion of overall energy consumption, energy use in the EU in the coming decades, even if we manage to increase the share of renewables substantially. We have seen a rise in the use of gas and a short-term increase in the use of coal, partly because of low prices caused by the shale gas revolution in the US and falling domestic demand in the US for coal, which has lowered prices. If we continue to use fossil fuels, we need to do something about the carbon, so the need for CCS is clear. But we're faltering. Efforts to encourage the development of large-scale demonstration projects have not been successful, frankly. There were 13 projects under consideration, none of which is moving forward to the operational stage. The reasons for this are well known, and our speakers will talk about it, but mainly low ETS prices have reduced the amount available under the NER 300 programme. Private sector operators have not stepped in. Governments have not been able to step in to provide the top-up funding. As you're no doubt aware as well, the European Commission launched a consultation in March, which concluded the ETS, which interestingly says the ETS price is unlikely to recover sufficiently in the near future to provide an incentive on its own to large-scale CCS. That consultation runs until the 2nd of July. We also have the second call for NER 300, which finishes, the deadline for which is the 3rd of July. The Commission's paper sets out a number of other options for incentivising CCS, and I'm sure we'll hear about them today. A CCS obligation and emissions performance standards being some of the ideas included in there. That's quite enough of me, I think. The format today is we have 4 speakers, 4 very expert speakers on this subject. I'll introduce them in a moment. They will each have 5 to 7 minutes to make introductory remarks on the topic, and then we'll move to a panel discussion and what I hope is a very lively, interactive Q&A with you, the audience, so that we really explore every nook and cranny or every crevice or geological cavern, maybe might be more appropriate, of this issue. We have until 10:25, then Tim Birtles of Shell will make some concluding remarks, and then there's a chance for further networking opportunities with coffee afterwards. So I'll quickly introduce the speakers, and then we can get on with the debate. Our first speaker today is Chris Davis, MEP. Chris is a Liberal Democrat MEP for North West England. Chris has has a long-standing interest in carbon capture and storage, and is writing the Parliament's report on the implementation of CCS. Second speaker is Mhairi Donnelly. Mhairi is a Director for Renewables, Energy Research and Innovation and Energy Efficiency in Directorate General Energy of the European Commission. Then Mhairi will be followed by Wolf Heijduk, who is a Senior Analyst, an expert on CCS, of course, at the International Energy Agency in Paris. And our final speaker is Mark Johnson, who is currently Senior Advisor on Energy, Environment and Climate Change at the European Policy Centre. So thanks to all the speakers for coming today, and thanks to you. If I can just, a little bit of housekeeping, ask you to switch your phones to silent or even off, or just to silent if you're paranoid about not being contactable for the next hour and a half. And then a special word of thanks to Chris, actually, for hosting this event and making it possible to be in the Parliament. We do prefer to be in the Parliament, and as a way, Comet Visions is supposed to be reaching out to the Brussels community, but in particular the elected representatives, so it's great when we're able to do it, and Chris made it possible this time, so we're very grateful for him. And so with that, I'd like to hand Chris the floor. Chris.
Thank you, Simon. And I want to start by mentioning two individuals. The first is John Ashton, who was the founder of E3G, and for a while was the climate change advisor to foreign secretaries in the United Kingdom. And I met John, he's also a sinologist, and I met John in 2007 to talk about climate change issues and the UK government's response. And it was he who really pointed out to me just I mean, I hadn't realized it before, though it should be obvious, the massive growth in fossil fuel consumption by China and India, the development of coal-fired power stations on an almost weekly or twice weekly basis, and the fact that if we didn't develop carbon capture and storage, we were stuffed. I mean, there was no way in which we were going to deal with this global warming problem with all these coal-fired power stations being built at such a rapid pace. And the second individual was a man I met for the first time last week, a guy called Mike Minear, who's a Canadian and runs the Boundary Dam project in Saskatchewan, which is a post-combustion coal-fired power plant with CCS. It'll be up and running in the autumn of this year. It's only a small plant, but and all its carbon dioxide is going to go off for enhanced oil recovery. But there you are, up and running by October this year, and he has two more plants in the pipeline, so to speak, which he expects to be able to get. He expects to be able to finance purely from the revenue from enhanced oil recovery. But that's carbon capture and storage. Not quite there's questions about the long-term storage, but carbon capture and medium-term storage at least, up and running and overtaking everything we're doing in the European Union at the present time. And the next thing I want to mention is about market failure, and it's really the market failure of this institution and of governments. Because if we're to achieve an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions domestically across Europe by 2050, then without the use of CCS, we would expect the bills to be about 40% higher than they otherwise would be. Now, that is an enormous amount of money. That is hundreds and hundreds of billions of euros. And we could save that money if we develop CCS and apply it properly. So where was the enthusiasm for it? Where are the individuals? I mean, within this Parliament, we're trying to organise at the moment a CCS contact group of MEPs who are paying an interest in the subject. It's a hard uphill task trying to find anyone. Talk about renewable energy and people line up. But talk about CCS and the number of individuals who come forward, not quite on the fingers of one hand, but the number of people who really genuinely take an interest and know what they're talking about is hard to find. So market failure there. But the problem we face is known. Despite all the emphasis that so many environmentalists and indeed governments place on the development of renewable energy, the world is becoming ever more dependent upon fossil fuels. It is fossil fuels that are still growing it's fossil fuels who are providing more and more of the world's energy requirements. Now, here in the European Union, we've been talking about CCS not actually, to be fair, for that long. I think the European Commission's first report that mentioned the need for it was 2006. 2007, the heads of government, of course, came out and said we want up to 12 plants in operation by 2015. 2008, I think the G8 said we want 20 plants around the world, or was it the IEA, I forget, one body after another said we wanted a number of plants up and running. No one quite said how we would finance these plants. It's known what's needed. We need to be able to give investors a degree of confidence about the future. We need to limit their liabilities. We need to give them a degree of certainty about what lies ahead. But above all, we need to give them some economic rationale, because at the moment there is no economic rationale for developing CCS. We want to develop a wind turbine, no problem at all. Just stick your hand out and someone will put some money in it. That's why the electricity generators at the moment are building are concentrating so much on renewable energy, because there's money to be made. There's no money at the moment to be made out of developing CCS. We assumed that the money would come from the carbon price, and that the emissions trading scheme alone would drive forward CCS investment. We know now that that's not going to happen, or not in the near future. So we have to find alternatives. And we have to find alternatives also if we, as a European Union, if we want to create jobs and promote investment and economic recovery. We also have to bear in mind what's happening elsewhere in the world. Some people say that CCS is an immature technology, which of course it is, but others even say that it's not yet a technology that's capable of being put into practice. And yet in Canada and China and the USA and Australia, we're seeing progress of a kind being made that we would like to emulate. Okay, three points here about how to go forward. The first is we need member state buy-in to a degree that we haven't yet got. The majority of member states are either indifferent to CCS or opposed to CCS. I think we can say that in varying degrees there's support for it in the UK and the Netherlands, France, Romania, Italy, Spain, maybe Lithuania. That's it. Hard to think of any other countries which are showing any interest at all. So we need to get that buy-in, and we need to maybe force member states to face up to the realities of life without CCS. I think we have to get them to produce their own roadmaps to a low-carbon future, which would, I suspect, just force them to look at the scenarios and say, well, how do we achieve these objectives without CCS in some cases? It's utterly essential to have member state buy-in. If you look at the CCS directive, the storage directive, it puts all sorts of obstacles in the way of anyone that wants to develop CCS without the support of the government. It's just impossible for them to go ahead. A government can kill CCS at any moment. You have to have the enthusiastic support of a member state government in order to make the CCS directive work in your favour. The questions of liability, for example, can be interpreted in ways which are very strict indeed, would simply prevent any sort of commercial investment unless you have a government buying into it, recognising the requirements of a private investor and helping that investor overcome the problems by saying, look, we want CCS. We recognise it's part of our CO2 reduction strategy, and we'll deal with the problems of liability. It's not a problem for you. The second is, I suppose, the need for a bit of support funding from the little pockets that the European Commission might have available, Horizon 2020 in particular. There does need to be some specific research on matters of storage and on some pilot projects to test certain technologies and the like. And in particular, there needs to be some encouragement for the industrial installations, not the power sector, but those big industries that seek to reduce their CO2 emissions and have no means of doing this whatsoever, other than by development of CCS. I mean, there isn't another way of producing cement, for example, without burning a lot of fossil fuels. And whatever energy efficiency techniques may be applied, you have to, if you're to avoid the CO2 emissions, we're going to need CCS. And I think some help is needed to encourage investment in those industries as a starter. But key to it all is the electricity generating sector. That's the centerpiece. It's 60, 70% of the core of the problem, of the CO2 emissions. As I said before, we hoped that the ETS would be the driving force behind that. Now we have to find the alternative. The Commission, in its communication, put forward some suggestions, and I think we need to hone in on its proposal for certificates. We need to refine that and define that more in ways that haven't yet been done. We need to insert a binding requirement upon we need to insert a binding requirement that CCS will be part of the package and that you must contribute to it, whether or not you are actively a CCS developer or not. And that could be a transboundary commitment, a trans-company commitment, but the money has got to come from somewhere, and it's got to come from a shared pot. And I think that pot has to be shared not simply amongst those who generate their electricity from coal, but also from those who generate their electricity from gas. And the question I think that we will have to determine in whether that pot is managed and whether is held by the electricity generators themselves or by those who supply the electricity generators with their coal and gas, or in some rare cases, oil, the actual owners of the fossil fuels. Remember, there is this issue now of fossil fuels being locked in. We have a huge store now of fossil fuels that we can't use if we're to deal with the problem of global warming. Vastly more fossil fuels have been identified than can be burnt, because those emissions would lead to temperature rises well in excess of anything we're talking about at the moment. As someone from the IPCC said to me once, it's not a matter of the next 50 years, it's what happens in the 50 years after that and the 50 years after that. Because if we carry on burning the fossil fuels, we just keep getting warmer and warmer until we boil like Venus. So, in summary, I'm still very much an enthusiast for CCS. We have got to find solutions. Solutions are there, but we've got to get the political buy-in to make them work. We've got to make it a standard arrangement, given that fossil fuels are here to stay, that when we're dealing with them, especially with coal, we have to take the SO2 out. We already take the SO2 out. We have to take the NOx out. We're already dealing with that. And we have to take the CO2 out as well. That way, we give a future for fossil fuels, and we give a better prospect for the world that is to come in the decades ahead.